Live from the SABC's Auckland Park studios, welcome to this midweek edition of the Watchdog. My name is Vuyo Mvogo, and on the show this evening,
water is in deep trouble. We are draining humanity's lifeblood through vampiric overconsumption and unsustainable use.
South Africa's precarious water situation. Are we waiting for things to deteriorate further to the levels of the electricity crisis that the country is currently experiencing before we can do something? Well, that's the focus of this evening's big interview and panel discussion as people across the globe mark International Water Day. The Watchdog starts now. A landmark United Nations Water Conference has opened in New York with key messages that water is in deep trouble and that the world faces a global water crisis. And South Africa is no different. Marking World Day, the gathering aims to place the preservation and sustainable consumption of water on a global stage. Amid concerning data that water-related targets within the Sustainable Development Goals remain alarmingly off track. The ongoing global water and sanitation crisis has been framed as a threat to everyone as climate change coupled with poor water management increases or multiplies the risk in all aspects of life.
The General Assembly awash in music and the colour blue, as delegations descend here to galvanise game-changing commitments to bring the water action agenda to life, with the UN chief framing the debate.
Water is in deep trouble. We are draining humanity's lifeblood through vampiric overconsumption and unsustainable use, and evaporating it through global eating. We've broken the water cycle, destroyed ecosystems, and contaminated groundwater. Nearly 3 out of 4 natural disasters are linked to water. 1 in 4 people lives without safely managed water services or clean drinking water. And over 1.7 billion people lack basic sanitation.
At the centre of this conference is Goal 6 of the SDGs, focused on ensuring availability and sustainable management of water and sanitation for all, with key targets. Achieve universal and equitable access to safe and affordable drinking water for all. Achieve access to adequate and equitable sanitation and hygiene for all. End open defecation. Improve water quality and reduce pollution, and expand international cooperation and capacity building support to developing countries.
This is more than a conference on water. It is a conference on today's world, seen from the perspective of its most important resource. This conference must represent a quantum leap in the capacity of member states and the international community to recognize and act upon the vital importance of water to our world's sustainability and as a tool to foster peace and international cooperation. From water as a key driver across economies and policy making, to the recognition of water and sanitation as a human right.
The conference is co-facilitated by Tajikistan and the Kingdom of the Netherlands that pointed to water as the defining issue of our time.
Leonardo da Vinci was absolutely right when he said that water was the driving force of nature. That driving force is now under threat. We face a future with too much or too little water, or water supplies that are too polluted. Research commissioned by the UN has shown that almost half of the world's population will suffer severe water stress by 2030. Not just stress, but severe stress. And the worst affected will be those who are already vulnerable. And let's not forget that 2030 is only 7 years away. The Sustainable Development Goals Report 2022 painted an alarming picture in almost all areas. In the words of that report, interlinked crises are putting the agenda for sustainable development in grave danger, along with humanity's very own survival.
Water and Sanitation Minister Senzo Mchunu is leading the South African delegation and will deliver the country statement later in the day. An event that comes as countries like South Africa and so many others find themselves in the grips of water stress, be that from climate change and changing ecosystems to poor water management, failing water infrastructure and an ever-expanding population which has increased demand for water, all exacerbated by a power crisis which directly impacts water supply operations around the country. As the push now comes for governments to develop and implement plans to ensure equitable water access for all, while also ensuring its sustainability for future generations to come. Shervin Brycebees, SABC News, New York.
Well, what is the situation in South Africa? Well, to answer that question and help us understand just how dire the situation is in our own country, I'm joined on the line by Edward Molopi, who is a Senior Communications and Advocacy Officer at the Senior Socio-Economic Rights Institute. Jeromino de Klerk is the founder of Feed the Future for Life, and Sinegugu Zugulu, who is Program Manager at Sustaining the Wild Coast. Good evening to all of you, gentlemen. Thank you very much for your time.
Good evening, and thank you very much for having me.
Good evening. Thank you for having us here.
Edward, how dire is the situation in South Africa?
Well, I mean, I think if you consider the landscape of South Africa and South Africa as a country, I think one of the things that we do need to clarify at the beginning is that, South Africa is one of the most unequal countries in the world. And unfortunately, this inequality is borne disproportionately by poor people. So when you look at water and supply of water, very often, sometimes you'll actually find that it is a tale of two cities, where there are people who have and people who do not have. I think as a country, we are now actually getting into a phase where those who actually had are starting to feel what it is like to lack. But there have been, before this, people who have actually had no access to sufficient water, even at times when others were enjoying that right.
Mm-hmm. In fact, Jeromino, I was reading earlier, I think it was Greenpeace that spoke to the very issue that Molopi raised around the how this crisis is affecting the poor in particular. I think they were talking about how water is very unevenly distributed, where you have millions of South Africa having to drink water that was captured in reservoirs that were hundreds of kilometers away, which meant that there was a big chance of that water actually being contaminated by the time they get to those poor people.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think from a community perspective, where the poorest of the poor are definitely hit high in terms of the water, because I always say that we represent the people or the auntie that walks with a bucket and go out to a tap that is quite very far for her to get access to water. We had a program the other day which is called the Water Access Committees, which is in different areas. So we have done the water mapping. And we have witnessed, and so with the research that we have done in the water mapping, so the water mapping is a program in the communities where the water action committees goes out and they map the daily usage of water that community members are using. And we have noticed that the amount of water that we are currently using as communities, it's not sufficient, for us. Then we have backyard dwellers, then we have those people that doesn't have access to a tap at all. Then those water also needs to be shared amongst them as well. So I think it's definitely affecting the poorest of the poor, because it's difficult for them to get access to water, it's difficult for them to go to fetch water, it's difficult for the auntie, the gogos, the elderlies to carry the bucket to get water. Whereas if, like the previous speakers mentioned, most of the people enjoyed it right before, where they could just open the tap and the waters were running. And now we witness that community members or the poorest of the poor is walking with buckets to go fetch water, which is actual fact that water is a human right. And if you have water in today's life, it's a privilege for you, where it is a human's right, of course, where all of us as South Africans, even the poorest of the poor, needed to have access to water and sufficient water, of course, and it doesn't need to be very far to go fetch water. So I think definitely to add on what you are saying is that this situation is currently affecting the poorest of the poor community worse than ever.
Mm-hmm. Of course, Sneguku, as much as low rainfalls, the weather, and all those things should be blamed, or maybe the causes of our water problems, so is neglected infrastructure. Sneguku?
Yes, Vuyo, though I didn't hear your question well, because...
Well, I was saying, yes, low rainfall, the climate are to blame for many of our problems when it comes to water, but so is neglected infrastructure. In other words, we haven't done well as a country to maintain, service, even build the kind of infrastructure that would go a very long way in ensuring that we may not suffer as much as we are likely to.
Yes. Yes. Thanks, Will. Yes. As much as we would be talking about the rainfall distribution, the have and the have-nots, but one of the major problems that we are facing as a country is the ailing infrastructure, which is not being fixed. And if we were to be blunt about it, we would say the water situation in the country is moving in the same direction as the electricity. In South Africa, for instance, the recent research shows that we have a challenge of about a backlog. If, for instance, you were to look into the Gqeberha situation, which is sitting at about 170 days of water right now. So they are sitting with about a of about 3,000 leaks for our residential township areas. It is something very common if you're driving through those streets that you come across water that's just flowing. And we also, is a common factor that we know that the South African infrastructure is very old, is not being fixed at the rate. So as a result, we are losing most of the water, of the potable water, which we have, let alone the fact that, of course, there are still many places in the country where people do not have access to water. But in terms of managing and maintaining the existing infrastructure, it is a big problem. But there are other serious problems that government is not taking into consideration. For instance, if we were to look in terms of the legislation requires government to implement what we call the catchment management agencies. How many of those they are working in South Africa? I think we currently have only one.
Edward, is it for lack of trying on the part of the government, or have they dropped the ball. And I'm talking here government collectively, in other words, the local, provincial, and national spheres.
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, it varies. So in some instances, I mean, if you look at the state and what they have claimed to have covered in terms of access to sufficient water, you'd actually find that the claims that they make are quite high in terms of who they've been able to reach, how many people they've been able to reach. So, I mean, I think in terms of their own indicators and how they think that they have done, they think that they have done pretty well. But
do you
I mean,
agree?
I think,
is the question.
no, we don't, and I'll explain why. So, I mean, I think in the previous speaker was speaking about issues of maintenance, right? If you look at, for example, in the inner city of Johannesburg, you do have buildings that have water points that would have like maybe have a tap or even a sanitation point like a toilet. But if you actually, and we've went into these buildings and actually even checked, you'll find that people don't actually, the tap might have been there at some points in past, but there's a very big issue of maintenance. And that means that people don't have access. Even though there's a tap there actually isn't water running in that tap. It's the same issues in informal settlements, where they will put maybe, for example, a one water point, and then they'll claim that it's access. But then when you look how many people are actually having access to this particular water point, you actually find that you are looking at even upwards of 50 households having to share one tap. And so it's those kind of issues where we say that the detail is important when we look at these statistics that come from the state and how they think that they have fared in terms of giving people access to water and even sanitation services, because very often those work in hand.
In fact, I mean, Jerome, just adding to what Edward, has said about access. Estimates are that around 20 to 30% of our water is lost through leaks. Now, that's an estimated 70 million liters a day of treated, clean, drinkable water lost every day, and most of the people, great majority of the people who are affected by that are actually poor.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more to you with that, because definitely that's the truth. And in personal from my point of view is that it's clear. I think it's clear when you go into the informal settlement, it's clear. You don't need to go look far. When you look out in your community, it's clear. These are the type of stuff that we need to see to a daily basis. These are the type of activities we see on a daily basis. And I think all these water that is going out for in terms of waste, due to the maintenance that are not very well, I think those are those water could have been saved for our communities. Those water could have been used, clean drinking water for our schools that doesn't have water. And it's not just the communities that doesn't have water. When we talk about schools, we talk about schools in our communities, neighboring communities, and these kind of things. And I think it's important for us to notice and to make sure that however we mention these kind of things, because it's currently happening in front of us. And I think we have water, but the water is not coming to us. We have water, but we don't have access to the water. We have water, but the water then goes to waste. And these are the things that we were mentioning the other day. In the Climate Justice Charter, we mentioned that if Parliament adopt the Charter, we could aim to stop hunger, thirst, and pollution. And I think that is clear, just to adopt the Charter, and the Charter basically explains it all. And meanwhile with the Charter, we witnessed that with the charter, we could definitely make lots of changes. We can't just blame the environmental aspects such as climate change. It's definitely clear that our so-called leaders are not doing everything in the capability.
But do we need a charter, Jeromino, to do the right thing?
No, not at all. But I think part of the charter is to work together with environmental organizations, and such as to decrease climate change effects. So I think the climate is already worse than the fact that it is now currently at this moment. But when we work with environmental organizations, I mean, we could see to these things. How do we get access to this community? How do we get sufficient water to the poorest of the poor? How do we we get access to the water for the schools that doesn't have? So these are the type of things that we need to look at. How do we do it? Where do we start? And I think that is where most of the leaders should think to start, because I saw something on the news the other day where the Central Karoo Mayor, Mr. Gaita McKenzie, erected the bucket system, which is the toilet system, and he gave toilets to the people on that side. Neither did we know on this side that the people on that side doesn't have water. So I think these are the type of things that we are seeing on a daily basis, witnessing on a daily basis, but no one is talking about it. So I think today and this evening, it's actually a privilege to mention these type of things where we witness on a daily basis. So yeah, through partnerships and through working to the communities, and how do we and where do we, those are the type of things that our leaders need to see to, and to maintain the water system for us to have sufficient water and for the water to come to us, or to get to us.
The reason, I mean, Sinegugu, I was asking Jeromino whether we need a charter to do the right thing. I'm by no means undermining the role, you know, of I mean, such initiatives, but it is for the reasons that often people point out or talk about. I mean, we hear this all the time, that we have one of the best constitutions in the world. Right now, we have a gender-based violence pandemic, and we have an action plan, but we're nowhere near where we can actually be, notwithstanding such things as action plans.
Yeah, the challenge with the South African situation is that we, as much as everybody knows and it's being mentioned that we are a water scarce country, but we are not behaving in the manner, we are not behaving like we understand what that means. So, for instance, if we were to look at how we behave as people still, like we mentioned the question of leaks, but we also, in the manner that we use water, where people use spraying or sprinklers in the broad daylight, for instance, when it's sunny, so you're losing lots of water. So if, for instance, we look at how even mere thing like how we wash our vehicles, how the sewerage plants or sewerage works for municipalities, for instance, we know that often they are broken. We are not recycling water. We are not reusing that water. So as a country, for instance, CSIR, which is the Center for Scientific and Industrial Research, they've done a research together with WWF, a study where they've identified the strategic water source areas for this country. These were looking at less than 10% of the land that could provide more than 50% of the water that is needed by the country. So in terms of managing our water, how do we manage the water? Identifying those water source areas, where is our water coming from? And then how do we make sure that we don't pollute? How do we make sure the areas which are supplying most of the water needed by the country, they are protected? That work is being done by agencies and the civil society organizations in those areas and those areas, and most of these strategic water source areas are within the Drakensberg. Now the onus is on government in this country to make sure that we don't let those areas to be available for fracking. For instance, when we're talking about the gas and oil, so we can't frack those areas. So we need to protect.
that line is really
those areas.
giving
so
us.
We have done protect water concept.
Okay, that line is giving. Let me come at you, Edward. I mean, if I may, just on the points that we were talking about. Edward, I mean, Snekugu was talking about. I mean, just now, we only get to restrict people's consumption of water. Ask your car washes and the like, to stop using a lot of water. We only ask residents to consume only a certain amount of liters per household, and impose quota limits on agricultural ventures when there is in other words, only when we have or we are on the verge of running out of water. Is that how we should be managing this resource?
Well, I mean, I think we should also be looking at who are also some of the biggest users of water. And I mean, that resident who, washes a car every other Sunday, basically your households aren't often the ones who use the most amount of water, and even in terms of wastages. But if you're looking at big industrialists and manufacturing, this is where also sometimes, I mean, I think very often, and this is the case where we punish the poor and ordinary household users at their expense and allow other big users to go on unpunished. So I mean, I think these are some of the people that we do need to be looking at and considering.
Mm-hmm. Those who sweep with water, for example.
Say that again?
I'm saying those people who use water to sweep.
Correct. Yeah. So I mean, I think so sometimes I think our efforts might be misplaced, and we do need to look and consider in terms of who is it that uses the most amount of water. But also, I mean, I think what we do need to stress is who else is lacking, and who else still needs to get that water, because even though we are speaking about curbing wastages, we will also need to really look at how do we make access more equitable to other people, because other people don't actually, if you're looking at informal settlements, don't even have that water to waste. And they wish that they would also have access to the same opportunities and water, so that they can also be told that you have don't use this amount of water. They really wish that they had that water that they have that is in excess, that others seems to have in excess.
Jeremiah, do you think there's enough sort of engagement with communities, but also other stakeholders like NGOs, the agricultural sector, businesses, to ensure that we are all on the same page, so to speak, and we're pulling together?
Well, I think definitely there is engagement, but for sure I cannot say whether there is enough engagement in terms of to make sure that we are moving towards the same goal or on the same page. And then you get environmental organizations such as, example, EMG, Environmental Monitoring Group. Then you get movements such as the Climate Justice Charter Movement, and all these kind of organizations who definitely work on a daily basis to ensure that trying to establish connections or communication in terms of ensuring that we reach the end goal, in terms of making sure that there's the engagement on how, where, and what And so definitely, I think the engagement is maybe not clear, but there is enough engagement in terms of environmental organizations on a personal perspective. I could definitely say that the engagement is there through the environmental organizations, through the environmental stakeholders, but I think just like you previously mentioned that, for example, we have a gender-based violence case in our country, but we have an action plan, but we are not moving toward this action plan. I mean, the same goes towards the water. We have water scarcity. People who doesn't have water, we have an action plan, but we are not moving toward the action plan. So I think the engagement is there, and surely for sure that there is relevant stakeholders, relevant NGOs, relevant NPOs in terms of the environmental aspect is working towards that goal. But I think the action plan, it's not working on to it. But I think the engagement is definitely there. So it's just a matter for the relevant stakeholders as well as the environmental groups, to work towards the end goal. Of course, the NPOs and the NGOs are definitely those who are currently working, on daily basis to ensure that they could reach out to the poorest of the poor. But we need the relevant stakeholders to meet the action plan and to work together with the NGOs and the NPOs to make sure that we reach the end goals and we reach the action plan.
There's been a lot of talk, Snegugu, lately, especially in the past few years, on the back of, the Day Zero scare in the Cape Town Metro, and now the Nelson Mandela Bay Metro, but also, of course, with all the sort of assessment that has been made over the years as to the state of our water situation as a country. A lot of talk around building water sensitive and resilient cities, about integrated planning, about building water smart cities. A lot of very strong and good language that suggests that some work has been done, but are these things being implemented? Are these things actually happening, or do they exist in paper only? They become analysis. On the back of that, nothing really happens on the ground.
Yeah, the biggest problem is exactly what we alluded to earlier on, to say we are not behaving as a water scarce country. Once we understand we are a water scarce country. For instance, if we were to take Joburg, we have recently had serious flooding that has happened here. But where did that water go? That water is led to drain away. So our cities are still designed in a manner where when there is too much water, there are water drainage pipes where water is drained away. So we need to be moving on to new era where we design for our cities to be water sponges, for the water to be captured and to be stored, be it underground, for us to begin a process of capturing the water from our roofs and to be able to purify, to clean that water so that it becomes usable water. If you look how much water, for instance, we flush down our toilets as a water scarce country, and we let the dirty water that we should be using to flush down our toilets, like during these storms, to just run off, and we drain it. We actually make an effort to drain that water away. So we are not, as a country, making an effort to make sure that we manage the water we have wisely. We are doing very little in terms of water conservation. How do we protect the water? How do we manage the alien invasive vegetation in those catchments? Getting our catchment management agencies to function is another challenge. Though the law is there, though the Constitution, the Water Act is there, is telling us what to do, but that's not happening. So getting our cities right and function for the future of water, we have got far too many water schemes that have been implemented under democracy but they are running dry. There's no water. The taps, they are running dry. So there is a whole lot of challenges, but they're all centered around that we are not conserving, we are not managing, we are not protecting the water resources we have. We are behaving like we have all the water. So, and all of those things, they call for municipalities, they call for the Department of Water and Sanitation to be making sure that the water we have is managed in a manner that would ensure that in the future there's water. I come from a village which has never had water supply. And there are many of those of those areas. So we need to manage water better. We need to conserve water. We need to manage our catchment. We need to target the water source areas and make sure that they are protected. Those areas, we should not be allowing mining to happen there to pollute the little water we have, so that we have got water to give to everyone. So the challenges of water management, of water protection, in other words, to make sure that we have water. Right now, the focus is on the distribution.
Okay.
But in terms of, Okay.
But that large issue there, I mean, is a debate for another day. Many people would agree with you, should preserve our water and ensure that, I mean, those who mine do not indeed pollute the water. But I think there's a lot more to that debate than we can even venture into right now. Let me thank all three of you for agreeing to come on. Snekugu Zugulu, Jeromino de Klerk, and Edward Molobi. But are we waiting for things to deteriorate to the levels of the current electricity crisis that the country is in or experiencing before we can really do something about the water crisis? That's the question. That's one, in fact, of the questions I'll be putting to the Deputy Minister of Water Affairs and Sanitation on the back of this short advertising break. The world is observing International Water Day, but are we doing enough as a country to preserve this precious resource? Well, joining me now is Deputy Minister of Water and Sanitation, Mr. David Mahlobo. Good evening, Deputy Minister. Thanks very much for your time.
Very good evening, and to all your viewers across the length and breadth of our land and beyond our borders.
Your documents say the mandate of the Department of Water Affairs, as set out in the National Water Act of 1998 and the Water Services Act of 1997, is to ensure that the country's water resources are protected, managed, used, developed, conserved, and controlled by regulating and supporting the delivery of effective water supply and sanitation. Do you think you're doing the best you can in those tasks?
We should firstly join the global community today, as you have said. We are celebrating the strides that the country and our globe has made with respect to issues of access to water, which is a human rights issue, and also part of our Sustainable Development Goal number 6, but also part of our NDP. Over the last 29 years, we must admit to have done well in expanding access to many South Africans who had no access to this important resource, including the economic benefits that are associated with water. More than 94% of our people have access to water, but we are the first to admit that over the last few years, we've seen a deterioration and a decline in terms of the availability of water, what we call it reliability of supply, on the basis of a number of challenges based on issues of management, leadership, the issues on how infrastructure has been managed. But we are very confident that as a country, we have prioritized this matter of access to water, especially on the basis of the assurance of supply, that in as much as South Africa is a water scarce country, we've been able to build more infrastructure, especially the bulk infrastructure. You can look at the Duop Dam that was built by this government, the work we're doing around Polihali Dam for the Lesotho Highlands Water Scheme. But there are many South Africans that we must admit that they still don't have access to water, and this government has that particular responsibility. The other matters that we have noted over some time is the deterioration of water quality in our country. In the main, is caused by challenges of pollution by a number of actors, especially industries, but mostly recently, the behavior of a number of municipalities whose wastewater treatment works, including sanitation facilities, they are polluting our rivers and our dams, and we need to tighten the regulation, and a number of them have been brought to book, and we must be able to support them. But the other point we have is that in South Africa, there's a lot of wastage on the basis that infrastructure is not in good condition. On average, more than 40% of the water that we have is lost through the networks and illegal connection on the basis that infrastructure has not been renewed or replaced when it is above their lifespan, 40 years, 70 years, and we're losing more of that particular water. We must also deal with the behavior of citizens that believe that we have abundance of water instead of saving the little that we have, because every drop that we waste, someone is looking for that particular drop. Lastly, there are issues around the question of climate change that we must be able to ensure that we are climate resilient and we are able to adapt as a country. There are a number of parts of our country, especially in the eastern seaboard, where we're receiving a lot of rains. It starts to cause us a lot of floods. Infrastructure, the way we do infrastructure, we must adapt. The way we settle communities, some of them within the floodlines, is causing problems. But there are certain parts of our land that are going to be drier and drier. The example is the prolonged drought that the people in the Eastern Cape, especially in the Nelson Mandela Bay, that they are exposed to. And we should be able to respond as a state in those particular issues.
In fact, you've raised all the issues that, the activists that I spoke to, but also the experts who have been talking, speaking today on our various platforms, the issues that everyone has actually raised. But I want to pick up on a few, starting with the last one, because as much as everyone accepts that, the issues of climate, issues of low rainfall, are a big problem, and certain studies say the problem is actually going to be worse. 3 or more times worse over the next a few years or a couple of decades. But the big issue that everyone is raising is that of neglected infrastructure, for which we have no one else to blame. And I don't know if you've been listening to some of the examples people make, who say that in the same way that we were warned, or government was warned about the electricity crisis, for example, no one seems to be heeding the warnings about the looming water crisis. Yes, we all say all the right things, but on the ground where action has to be taken, there's very little, if any, movement there.
By experts, in part they are correct, but also in part they don't have adequate information at our disposal. One of the biggest issues that we are saying we need to do is to ensure that we guarantee South Africans that by 2030 we will not have problems about the availability of water in our land. That's why there are a number of big projects that the president has announced. They are already being rolled out. An example, here in the Western Cape, the Glen Williams Dam is being actually expanded in terms of raising of the dam wall. We are looking at the issue of Umkomazi in KwaZulu-Natal, the issues that Gauteng was going to have problems at a particular point in terms of our availability of water, in terms of the integrated Vaal River water system, where about 14 water systems, they bring water into that Vaal system. The problem that we had with Lesotho, they've been resolved, including the issues of objection letter by Namibia. We are proceeding in terms of building that Polihali Dam, But when you go to issues of in Limpopo, for an example, we're looking at raising of the Zanini Dam wall. We're looking at a number of projects even in Mpumalanga, Yonoskop, in the Eastern Cape. There's a lot of issues that have been happening. But I must admit that there have been a lot of delays, and there has a huge financial implication.
And that's one of the big issues, because I mean, 2030 is in 7 years' time. Minister number one. And two, if, as you said, I mean, we're losing 40% of our water, I mean, through leaks. We're talking close to 100 million liters of treated clean water every day. I'm not sure if we're going to be able to meet that deadline.
While there are these issues, around the issues that we have lost time, but some of us who grew up in the water sector and as professionals, we are not going to have problems if we do certain things. One of the things that we've already started doing and working with all the municipalities, including deploying our water boards, we have ensured that the issues of dealing with water leaks, which is about the replacement of infrastructure, because when you replace infrastructure, what it will do, you will guarantee the availability of supply. So to those citizens that used to have water yesterday, but don't have water today, we must guarantee them that they have that particular water. That function of replacing and renewing infrastructure has also a revenue component, because if let's say you buy 100 megaliters of water, let's say from rainwater, and you lose 40 megaliters, what does it mean? You still have to pay for the 40 megaliters that you lose. Therefore, many municipalities, if they fix the infrastructure, renew and replace, they will be able not to actually waste water, but the citizens will have, because if it was not that particular wastage. The other matter that we're also doing is to use water conservation and demand management. The issues of reuse. Make an example, go to Agri-Biesport Dam, that is highly polluted. Gauteng alone is releasing close to 500 million liters of partially treated sewer water into Madibeng in the northwest. But if that particular water, like there's an uptake by certain industries that they can be able to use rather than to use clean potable water, an example in Khalakwana, where there are big mines that are actually using sewer water effluent. Those are some of the things that we're going to do so that we don't have a crisis. But we're also going to explore.
Well, the sense among activists and academics is that this is exactly what you're not doing, because we should have started doing those things. We should have started, if not nudge, like really whip them into line to say, guys, you can't waste. In other words, not wait till we get to a crisis. And the activists I was speaking to earlier were saying, you find that it's communities that are being punished, whereas the big industrial players who are wasting a lot of water or who could do better do exactly what you've just described, for instance, or spoken about in the Northwest, but you're not getting them to do that, and they're not going to do so voluntarily.
Let's indicate that's not entirely true. There were times there were missteps, William. I'm on the ground, Minister Mtuni is on the ground, the Deputy Minister Shabalala are all on the ground. I'm speaking about lived examples where infrastructure in a number of municipalities in our land is being renewed. An example where issues of recycling, I'm making an example of Mkhalakwen, where a mine said, I need the wastewater to be able to use the effluent for my mining of chrome. Then I'm going to build you this wastewater treatment plant, which the plant is already built, while at the very same time doing these other things. But at the very same time, we must admit, local government is our weakest link in the chain. It doesn't matter which municipality is managed by which political party. All these municipalities, even metros, even here in the Western Cape, infrastructure is not being managed well. You can sue when you go to these townships. The sewer is running into various communities. That's why we say we want to work together with these various stakeholders, including research institutions. An example, about a week ago, you will know that Gauteng has been having a lot of water interruptions, especially in Tshwane, where I stay, in Gauteng, in Johannesburg, and so forth. And we've agreed to say, let's stop finger pointing, let's bring capacity in terms of our water institutions, let's bring funding, because we have a water partnership office working with National Treasurer and DBSA, and assist them, because a number of the current investment in the water infrastructure are not sufficient by these big metros, let alone the small municipalities that are dependent on the support of the grants that we give as a department, and the other one that are coming from the equitable share.
Well, 7 years is not a lot of time, Minister. Hopefully, we will, as a country, be able to meet those deadlines that we have set for ourselves. Thank you very much for your time. Well appreciated.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Deputy Minister of Water and Sanitation as the world, of course, marks International Water Day. It's a scarce resource that we need to take care of. The people who've been saying over the years that the next big wars will be fought over this resource. So we really need to take care of it, and we don't need to get into situations similar to the electricity crisis before we can do something about it. That's our show for tonight. Do join us again tomorrow evening, same time. Have a good night.